March 1865, the coast of Senegal. Dawn breaks blood red over the Atlantic. 12 French warships cut through the waves toward shore. On a stone watchtower overlooking the beach stands Lat Dior and Diop, the last king of the Wolof kingdom of Cayor. In his right hand, a curved cavalry sword. In his left, a string of prayer beads. Behind him, 500 warriors kneel in the sand, reciting verses from the Quran. The air smells like gunpowder and salt. The king's white robes snap in the wind. He turns to face his men and speaks words that will echo through generations. They come for our land, our people, our faith. We die as martyrs or live as Muslims, never as slaves. What happened in the next 3 hours was systematically erased from every colonial history book published in the next century. The Wolof Empire, West Africa's Islamic superpower that resisted slavery and colonization for 400 years, was buried in silence. The warriors who faced European cannons with nothing but swords and faith. The kings who chose death over surrender. The empire that said no to the slave trade when everyone else said yes. All of it deleted, all of it hidden, until right now. France needed 50 years and 10,000 soldiers to conquer one African kingdom. Think about that number, 50 years. A half-century of constant warfare just to defeat the Wolof people. They threw regiment after regiment at Senegal. They lost thousands of men. They burned through military budgets that bankrupted colonial administrations. And when they finally won, they spent the next 130 years making sure you never learned about it. They burned the libraries. They banned the oral histories. They wrote textbooks that started African history with European arrival. They needed you to believe that Africans were weak, that Muslims were backwards, that resistance was futile. They needed you to forget that your ancestors were warriors who terrified the most powerful empires on earth. This video will shatter everything you were taught about African weakness and Muslim passivity. You are going to discover why the Wolof Empire made European slave traders avoid Senegalese territory for centuries. You will see the specific military tactics that allowed outnumbered African warriors to hold off French armies for decades. You will learn the exact methods France used to destroy Wolof and why they kept those methods secret. And you will understand how this hidden history connects directly to the wealth gap you see today, the reparations movement happening right now, and the fight for justice that your generation must finish. After this, you will never see African history the same way. You will never see Islam the same way. You will never see your own identity the same way. Because the truth is this, your ancestors were not victims. They were not passive. They were not waiting to be saved by Europeans. They built empires. They created civilizations. They resisted with everything they had. And the only reason you do not know this is because the people who conquered them needed to conquer your mind too. If your ancestors came from Senegal, Gambia, Mali, or anywhere in West Africa, this is your story. This is the empire that fought so you could be Muslim and free. Your faith was not given to you by oppressors. It was your weapon against them. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly how that weapon was used, why it was so effective, and why they have worked so hard to make you forget it ever existed. Let me be clear about what you are about to receive. You will learn how Wolof warriors combined Islamic law with military genius to build an empire that dominated West Africa for 4 centuries. You will see the breaking point when European slave traders demanded that Wolof kings sell their own people, and the Wolof response that changed everything. You will witness the specific battles where African Muslims charged European cannons on horseback while reciting prayers. You will discover why France had to systematically destroy every record of Wolof resistance. You will understand the legal mechanisms they used to erase this history from textbooks. And you will see how the theft of Wolof land in 1890 connects directly to why Senegalese families are poor today, while French banks hold billions in stolen African wealth. This is not ancient history. Your grandmother was born during colonial rule. Your mother was born just years after independence. The theft happened yesterday. The cover-up is still happening today. And you are about to become one of the few people on Earth who knows the full truth. Let me take you back to the beginning. The 13th century, the region we now call Senegal. While Europe was fumbling through the Dark Ages, African kingdoms were building sophisticated political systems, trade networks, and Islamic universities. The Wolof people were not a single tribe, they were a federation. 5 kingdoms united under a common language, common faith, and common resistance to outside domination. Jolof in the center, the seat of power and the home of the paramount king. Cairo on the coast, the strongest military force in the Federation. Bail in the strategic interior. Wallo controlling the Senegal River Delta, and Sine and Saloum to the south. Together, they controlled 150,000 square kilometers, population at its peak, 1.5 million people. A standing army of 50,000 trained warriors, more than 200 Quranic schools scattered across the empire. The Wolof had converted to Islam in the 11th century through contact with Berber merchants crossing the Sahara. But this was not a conversion at gunpoint. This was not colonization disguised as religion. The Wolof adopted Islam because it aligned with their existing concepts of justice, community, and resistance to tyranny. They built a unique system that blended Sharia law with traditional Wolof governance. They established madrasas where children learned to read Arabic, memorize Quran, study mathematics and astronomy. They trained warriors according to the principles of defensive jihad: protect the community, defend the faith, never initiate aggression, but never surrender when attacked. The Wolof economy was built on gold, leather, and peanut agriculture. They exported goods across the Sahara to North Africa and down the coast to other West African kingdoms. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems that allowed them to farm in semi-arid regions. They were wealthy, they were organized, they were powerful. And here is the critical detail that changes everything. They refused to participate in the transatlantic slave trade. Let that sink in for a moment. When European ships started appearing off the West African coast in the 1400s, when the demand for enslaved Africans began to explode, when other kingdoms were being pressured and bribed and threatened into selling their own people, the Wolof said no. Not because they were weak, not because they had nothing to offer, but because Islamic law forbade the enslavement of fellow Muslims. And the Wolof took that law seriously. This is the part they never teach you in school, the part that destroys the narrative that Africans were complicit in their own oppression. Yes, some African kingdoms participated in the slave trade. Yes, some African rulers sold captives to Europeans. But the Wolof Empire, one of the largest and most powerful kingdoms in West Africa, refused for 150 years. They built their resistance on faith. They grounded their defiance in Islamic principles. And that defiance would eventually cost them everything. Now we need to jump forward to the 1670s. The French had established a slave trading post on Guélé Island, just off the coast of Senegal, a small piece of land that would become one of the most infamous slave depots in history. From Guélé, French ships would carry millions of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic to the Americas. But there was a problem. The French needed a steady supply of captives, and the Wolof kingdoms on the mainland refused to provide them. French traders would arrive with guns, cloth, alcohol, all the goods they used to bribe African rulers elsewhere. They would meet with Wolof kings and make their offer. We will give you European weapons and trade goods. All you need to do is provide us with prisoners, criminals, captives from your wars, standard practice across West Africa at that time. Other kingdoms were saying yes. The Wolof said no. In 1673, King Lat Dior Fall of Cairo issued a decree that would define Wolof resistance for the next 2 centuries. No Muslim shall be sold into bondage. He did not stop there. He established coastal patrols to prevent kidnapping. He declared that any European slave trader caught capturing Wolof people would be executed. He sent a clear message to the French: you can trade with us for gold, for leather, for agricultural goods, but you cannot have our people. The economic consequences were immediate. France embargoed Wolof trade. European companies redirected their ships to kingdoms that would cooperate. The Wolof became economically isolated, but they did not break. They prepared for war instead. They trained an elite warrior class called the Tseto. These were not just soldiers, they were trained from childhood in Wolof martial arts, cavalry tactics, and Islamic military ethics. Every Tseto warrior could ride, shoot, and fight with sword and spear. Every Tseto warrior had memorized significant portions of the Quran. They were spiritual warriors, and they were about to need every bit of that training. The Wolof did not just defend their borders, they went on the offensive. In 1677, Wolof warriors raided the French slave post on Guélé Island. They freed hundreds of captives who had been imprisoned there, waiting for ships. They destroyed slave pens and burned buildings. They sent a message: your slave trade is not welcome here. 4 years later, 1681, they did it again. Another raid. More captives freed, more buildings burned. French colonial records from that period admit the problem. One report from 1680 states the Wolof kingdoms refuse all trade in humans. They attack our slave posts. We cannot operate safely in their territory. Think about what this means. For 150 years, while the transatlantic slave trade was destroying African populations from Senegal to Angola, while an estimated 12 million Africans were being shipped across the ocean, while kingdoms were collapsing and societies were being torn apart, the Wolof Empire stood firm. They said no. They fought back. They freed captives. They executed slave raiders. They chose economic isolation and military conflict over participation in one of history's greatest crimes. This was not weakness. This was not backwardness. This was jihad. This was resistance grounded in Islamic faith. This was exactly what they do not want you to know. But here is where the story gets darker. Because France was not going to accept this defiance forever. The slave trade was too profitable. West Africa was too valuable. And the Wolof refusal to cooperate was becoming an embarrassment to French colonial ambitions. So in the 1850s, France made a decision. If the Wolof will not submit through economic pressure, we will break them through military conquest. If they will not sell their people, we will take their land. If they will not cooperate with our empire, we will destroy theirs. And in 1854, France sent the man who would carry out that mission, General Louis Faidherbe, 8,000 French soldiers, modern rifles, artillery, a mandate from Paris, civilize the Wolof Muslims, conquer Senegal, open the territory for French settlement and exploitation. December 1854. French forces march on Cayor, the strongest of the Wolof kingdoms. King Birima Ngone Latyr hears the reports. Foreign soldiers crossing the border, artillery being positioned, the smell of war. He does not hesitate. He calls up 15,000 Wolof warriors, cavalry on horseback, infantry with spears and swords. Some have muskets traded from earlier European contacts, but most are armed with traditional weapons. They know they are outgunned. They know French artillery can cut through their lines. But they also know something the French do not understand. The Wolof do not fight for territory alone. They fight for faith. They fight with the certainty that dying in defense of Islam guarantees paradise. That changes everything. The Wolof use the terrain to their advantage. Senegal is not European battlefield country. It is semi-desert in places, thick brush in others. The French are used to open field warfare where artillery dominates. The Wolof use guerrilla tactics. They strike at night. They ambush supply lines. They set fires upwind of French camps, forcing soldiers to relocate or choke on smoke. They poison water sources. They disappear into territory they know intimately, and the French do not. And it works. The first French offensive is thrown back. 2,000 French soldiers dead or wounded. French commanders retreat to coastal positions and send desperate reports back to Paris. We underestimated them. We need more men. We need more time. France sends more men, but the Wolof adapt. The war becomes a grinding stalemate. French forces control some coastal cities, but cannot penetrate deep into Wolof territory. The Wolof cannot drive the French completely out, but make occupation so costly that French officials question whether Senegal is worth the expense. This goes on for years. Skirmishes, raids, occasional pitched battles. The French slowly gain ground through sheer firepower, but the Wolof never stop resisting. And then, in 1862, a new king rises in Cayor. His name will become legend, Lat Dior Ngone Latyr Diop. Lat Dior was not born to be king. He was a prince, yes, but not the direct heir. He came to power in the chaos of war, elected by the Wolof nobility because they needed a warrior king who could face the French threat. And Lat Dior was exactly that. He was in his early 30s when he took the throne. He had fought in multiple campaigns against France. He had studied Islamic texts and Wolof military history. He understood that the old tactics were not enough. If the Wolof were going to survive, they needed to evolve. So Lat Dior did something radical. He declared total war, not just military resistance, but economic, social, and spiritual mobilization. Every Wolof citizen became part of the war effort. Farmers grew food for warriors, blacksmiths made weapons, imams preached sermons calling resistance a religious duty. Women scouted enemy positions and carried messages through French lines. Lat Dior also reached out to neighboring kingdoms. He built alliances with other Islamic states who feared French expansion. He offered them a simple argument. If France conquers Wolof, you are next. If we fall, you fall. Stand with us now or face France alone later. Some kingdoms joined him. Others stayed neutral or even sided with France, hoping to gain advantage. But enough stood with Lat Dior to create a coalition that France had to take seriously. The war intensified. 1864, the Battle of Guélé. Lat Dior leads 6,000 cavalry against 3,000 French infantry, entrenched on a hillside. The French have repeating rifles and 2 artillery pieces. Every military manual says cavalry cannot charge entrenched infantry with artillery support. Lat Dior does it anyway. He divides his force into 3 waves. The first wave charges directly at the French center, drawing fire. The second wave swings wide to the left, forcing the French to split their attention. The third wave, led by Lat Dior himself, hits the French right flank where the artillery is positioned. The Wolof lose hundreds in the first minutes. Horses and men go down under rifle fire, but they do not stop. They close the distance. They overrun the artillery. They break through the infantry line, hand to hand fighting on the hillside, swords against bayonets. When the battle ends 3 hours later, the French are retreating. They leave behind their artillery, their supplies, and 600 dead. The Wolof lose 400 warriors, but they win. News of the victory spreads across West Africa. The Wolof defeated a modern European army. Maybe resistance is not futile after all. 1 year later, 1865, the Battle of Somb. French General Pinet-Laprade leads a punitive expedition into Cayor territory, determined to crush Lat Dior once and for all. He brings 2,000 soldiers, 8 cannons, and a personal vow to capture the Wolof king. The armies meet near the village of Somb. The French form a defensive square, standard European tactic against cavalry. Cannons at the corners, rifles forming walls of fire. It should be impregnable. Lat Dior studies the formation. He notices something. The French square is positioned with its back to a river. They think this protects their rear. Lat Dior sees an opportunity. He sends a small force to attack the square from the front, just enough to fix French attention. Then he takes 300 cavalry on a wide flanking move, crossing the river upstream where it is shallow. His force comes up behind the French position, emerging from the river soaked and muddy but undetected. They charge the French rear. Total surprise, panic in the square. French soldiers turn to face the new threat, breaking formation. Wolof cavalry crashes through gaps in the line. General Pinet-Laprade is killed in the chaos, cut down by a Wolof sword. The French rout. They abandon everything and run for the coast. Lat Dior has killed a French general and shattered another expedition. He is now the most wanted man in the French Empire. France responds with overwhelming force. They pour more regiments into Senegal. They bring in colonial troops from other territories. They establish permanent forts and supply depots. They wage a war of attrition, knowing they can replace losses, and the Wolof cannot. Slowly, incrementally, the French gain ground. They take villages, they burn crops, they cut off trade routes, they bribe some Wolof nobles to switch sides. But Lat Dior does not surrender. He retreats when he has to. He raids when he can. He keeps fighting for 20 years, 2 decades of constant warfare. The French control more and more territory, but they cannot catch Lat Dior. They cannot break Wolof resistance. And then comes 1886, the year everything changes, the year of the final battle. October 26, 1886, the village of Guélé in Cayor territory. Lat Dior is now 56 years old. He's been fighting France for most of his adult life. His kingdom is reduced to a fraction of its former size. Most of his allies have fallen or made peace. He commands maybe 2,000 warriors, and half of them are low on ammunition. French intelligence knows where he is. They send 5,000 soldiers, 3 batteries of artillery, and a new weapon. Gatling guns, early machine guns that can fire hundreds of rounds per minute. This is not a battle. This is an execution, and everyone knows it, including Lat Dior. The night before the battle, Lat Dior gathers his warriors. They pray Aisha, the night prayer, together. Then he speaks. Tomorrow we meet the enemy. We are outnumbered. We are outgunned. Many of us will die, maybe all of us, but we will die as Muslims defending our land. We will die as free men who never bowed to oppressors. We will meet Allah with honor. There is no shame in this death. There is only shame in surrender. His warriors know what he is saying. This is the end. This is where the story of Wolof resistance will finish. But it will finish with them on their feet, weapons in hand, facing the enemy. Not on their knees begging for mercy. Dawn breaks. The warriors pray Fajr, the dawn prayer. They line up in formation, cavalry in front, infantry behind. Lat Dior rides at the head of his horsemen, wearing white robes, carrying his sword and his prayer beads. The French artillery opens fire from long range. Explosions tear through Wolof ranks. Men and horses go down. The Wolof do not retreat. They charge straight into the artillery fire. The Gatling guns open up, sustained bursts of fire that sound like cloth tearing. More warriors fall. They keep charging. They are reciting Quran verses as they ride. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. They believe this absolutely. They are charging to their deaths, and they do not waver. Some Wolof cavalry makes it through the artillery barrage and reaches the French infantry. Brief, brutal hand-to-hand fighting before French reinforcements close in. Most Wolof warriors die in the first hour. The rest retreat to a small hill and fight from there, surrounded. They run out of ammunition and fight with swords and spears. They fight until there are only 50 men left standing around Lat Dior. Then 20, then 10. Lat Dior is wounded multiple times but stays on his feet. He is still reciting prayers, still swinging his sword, and then a French bullet finds him. He falls. The last few warriors around him are cut down moments later. By mid-morning, it is over. 1,800 Wolof warriors dead. 200 managed to escape into the forest and will continue guerrilla resistance for another 10 years. But the organized Wolof military is destroyed. Lat Dior is dead. The Wolof Empire is finished. A French lieutenant named Dubois writes in his journal that night, "They charged our cannons with swords, screaming prayers. I have never seen such courage or such faith. We won, but we did not conquer their spirit." That journal entry is buried in French military archives for a century. Most French historians do not mention the Battle of Guélé. Most do not mention Lat Dior. Most do not want anyone to know that it took France 40 years and thousands of casualties to defeat one African Islamic kingdom, because that story does not fit the narrative. That story makes Africans look powerful and Europeans look brutal, so they bury it. And now you know why. The aftermath of Wolof defeat was systematic cultural destruction. France did not just conquer territory, they set out to erase memory. 1890. French colonial administration announces complete control over Senegal. The Wolof kingdoms are dissolved, the old political structures are destroyed, Sharia courts are banned, Quranic schools are closed or placed under French supervision, imams are required to register with colonial authorities, any public Islamic ceremony needs French approval. The French impose a new legal code called the Code de l'Indigénat, Indigenous Code. It gives French administrators the power to arrest and imprison any African without trial. The official crimes include things like showing disrespect to French officials, spreading rumors, and inciting religious fanaticism. That last one is the key. Inciting religious fanaticism means talking about Wolof resistance, means telling your children that their grandfather fought France, means keeping alive the memory that you were once free. Hundreds of Wolof are arrested under this law. Griots, the traditional oral historians who memorize and recite Wolof history, are specifically targeted. If French authorities catch a griot telling stories about Lat Dior or the battles against France, that griot goes to prison. 5 years minimum. Some are sent to forced labor camps in other parts of French West Africa, deliberately separated from their communities so the oral tradition dies with them. And it works. Within one generation, most young Wolof have never heard the full story of their own resistance. They know there were wars. They know France won. But the details, the heroes, the specific battles, the reasons for resistance, all of that becomes fuzzy, mythical, uncertain. The French also seized land. 2.5 million hectares of the best agricultural territory in Senegal, land that belonged to Wolof families for generations, is declared property of the French state. Some is given to French settlers who want to start peanut plantations. Some is held by French companies. The Wolof families who once owned this land are offered a choice. You can work as laborers on land you used to own, or you can leave. Most stay because they have nowhere else to go. They become sharecroppers, tenant farmers, wage workers on their own ancestral property. The wealth that land generates, the profits from peanut exports, the increase in land value over time, all of that goes to French pockets. None of it stays in Wolof hands. And this is not ancient history. This happens in the 1890s. Your great-great-grandparents were alive. This is the foundation of the wealth gap that exists right now between France and Senegal. But the most insidious destruction is historical. The French burn libraries. Not big public libraries, because those barely exist in Senegal at that time, but private collections. Wolof nobles had maintained written records, histories of their kingdoms, genealogies, records of land ownership. French soldiers go house to house in the years after conquest, searching for these documents. When they find them, they burn them. They also burn or confiscate Quranic manuscripts, especially ones with marginal notes that included Wolof historical information. The stated reason is that these texts might contain seditious ideas, calls for continued resistance. The real reason is that they are evidence that the Wolof had sophisticated political systems, evidence of land ownership, evidence that Wolof civilization was not primitive or backwards, evidence that French conquest was theft, not civilizing mission. All of that evidence is destroyed. French historians then write the official history of Senegal. And in that official history, the Wolof Empire barely exists. It is mentioned briefly as a collection of tribal chiefdoms with no central organization, no written culture, no significant achievements. Lat Dior is called a bandit chief who led a rebellion, not a king who defended his kingdom, not a warrior who fought for faith and freedom, a bandit. The battles are described as skirmishes or police actions, not wars. The Wolof resistance is called fanaticism, not courage. And this version of history is what gets taught in schools. French schools in France, so French children grow up thinking their empire was glorious and faced no serious resistance. And colonial schools in Senegal, so Wolof children grow up not knowing their own history. In 1911, the French Governor General of West Africa issues an order. Order 447. It states that all oral histories glorifying Wolof resistance are forbidden. Anyone caught teaching such histories will be imprisoned for 5 years. Hundreds are jailed under this order over the next 2 decades. The cultural genocide is thorough. By the time Senegal gains independence in 1960, an entire generation of Senegalese has been educated in French colonial schools where they learned about Napoleon, Louis XIV, French military glory, but nothing about their own kings, their own warriors, their own resistance. A survey done in 1953 asks Senegalese students to name historical figures. 89% can name at least 3 French kings. 12% can name a single Wolof king. This is not an accident. This is the result of 70 years of systematic historical erasure. Now, let me show you something that will shatter any remaining doubt that this was deliberate policy. The Wolof were not the only ones. This happened everywhere. Every time African Muslims resisted European colonization, the same pattern played out. Crush them militarily, erase them historically. Let me take you to Nigeria, 1804, northern Nigeria. An Islamic scholar named Usman Dan Fodio watches the corruption of local rulers who claim to be Muslim but enslave their own people, tax believers into poverty, and collaborate with British slave traders on the coast. He begins preaching reform. He calls for a return to true Islamic principles. He says Muslims should not be enslaved. He says rulers must be just or be replaced. Thousands join his movement. The corrupt rulers panic and try to kill him. That is their mistake. Usman Dan Fodio declares jihad. Not a war of conquest, but a defensive struggle against tyranny and injustice. And he wins. By 1809, Usman Dan Fodio has established the Sokoto Caliphate, the largest Islamic state in African history. It stretches across what is now northern Nigeria and parts of Niger, Cameroon, and Chad. Population at its peak, 10 million people. The Caliphate establishes Sharia courts, builds mosques and schools, creates a functioning bureaucracy, and most importantly, bans participation in the transatlantic slave trade. Yes, slavery exists within the Caliphate as it did across the Islamic world at that time, but it is regulated by Islamic law. Prisoners of war, not kidnapped civilians, and Muslims cannot enslave other Muslims. The British want the Sokoto Caliphate to provide slaves for the Atlantic trade. Sokoto refuses. The British offer trade deals, weapons, wealth. Sokoto refuses. This goes on for decades. Sokoto builds a civilization. The British watch and wait and plan. 1903, Britain decides it is time. The official reason given is that Sokoto practices slavery and Britain wants to abolish it. The real reason is that Sokoto controls valuable trade routes and refuses to submit to British economic domination. Britain sends Frederick Lugard with a military force. Lugard has a new weapon, the Maxim gun, the first true machine gun. It can fire 500 rounds per minute. Sokoto warriors have swords, spears, some muskets. They have courage and faith. They do not have machine guns. The British march on Kano, one of the great cities of the Caliphate. March 1903. Sokoto sends 2,000 warriors to defend the city. They know they are outgunned, but they will not surrender their homeland without a fight. The warriors charge the British position. The Maxim guns open up. 2,000 men charge. Most are dead within 20 minutes. Bodies pile up in front of the British lines. A few warriors make it through the gunfire and engage in hand-to-hand combat before being overwhelmed. The British lose fewer than 50 men. They take Kano. They march on Sokoto city itself. Same pattern. Brave warriors charging into machine gun fire. Same result. Slaughter. By July 1903, the Sokoto Caliphate is defeated. Sultan Atahiru refuses to surrender. He leads his remaining followers on a hijra, an Islamic exodus, trying to reach Mecca rather than live under British rule. The British hunt him down and kill him. The Caliphate is dissolved. Britain installs puppet rulers and begins the process of economic exploitation. And then comes the historical erasure. The British burn the Great Library of Kano. 50,000 manuscripts, Islamic legal texts, scientific treatises, historical chronicles, poetry, mathematical works, 500 years of intellectual production, gone, burned. The British claim they are destroying seditious materials. They are destroying evidence that Africans had advanced civilizations, evidence that the Sokoto Caliphate was sophisticated, organized, and functioning. Evidence that might make people question whether British conquest was really a civilizing mission. British colonial textbooks written after 1903 describe the Sokoto Caliphate as a slave state. They say the British invaded to free enslaved people. They do not mention that Sokoto refused to participate in the transatlantic slave trade. They do not mention that Islamic law in Sokoto provided legal protections for enslaved people that did not exist in British colonies. They do not mention the massacres. They do not mention the library burning. They call the conquest a liberation. And that is the version that gets taught in Nigerian schools for the next 60 years. Let me take you further back in time and across the Mediterranean. 1147, North Africa and Spain. The Almohad dynasty rises to power. They are Berber Muslims from Morocco who build an empire stretching from modern-day Libya to Portugal. They control both sides of the Strait of Gibraltar. They are the shield protecting African Muslims from European crusader armies. The Almohads build universities in Marrakesh and Fez that are among the most advanced in the world. They study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy. They develop irrigation systems. They create beautiful architecture. They defend Muslim Spain from Christian reconquest for over a century. But Europe is patient. Christian kingdoms in Spain form alliances. They wait for moments of Almohad weakness. And in 1212 comes the critical battle, Las Navas de Tolosa. A combined Christian army faces the Almohad forces in central Spain. The Christians have superior cavalry and the advantage of fighting on familiar terrain. The Almohads lose. It is the beginning of the end. Over the next 50 years, Christian forces systematically conquer former Almohad territory in Spain. And everywhere they conquer, they destroy. They burn mosques and build churches on the foundations. They burn libraries. The great Islamic library of Córdoba, which held hundreds of thousands of books, is destroyed. Arabic is banned. Muslims are forced to convert to Christianity or leave. Tens of thousands are killed in pogroms. By 1300, Muslim power in Spain is reduced to the tiny kingdom of Granada, which will hold out for another 2 centuries before it too falls. The historical erasure is total. European historians call this the Reconquista, the reconquest. As if Spain naturally belonged to Christians and Muslims were foreign invaders who had to be expelled. They do not call it what it was: conquest and ethnic cleansing. They do not acknowledge that Muslim Spain was more advanced, more tolerant, and more prosperous than Christian Spain. They do not mention the libraries burned, the scholars killed, the knowledge lost. They write history as if the triumph of Christianity over Islam in Spain was inevitable and good. And that version is still taught in most Western schools today. Now, let me take you to Southeast Asia, 1899, the Philippines. Spain has just lost a war with the United States and ceded the Philippines to American control. Most Filipinos are Christian, converted during Spanish colonial rule. But in the southern islands of Mindanao and Sulu live the Moro people. They are Muslims. They have resisted Spanish conquest for 300 years. They are not interested in trading Spanish masters for American ones. So when American forces arrive to take control, the Moro resist. The Americans call them savages. President Theodore Roosevelt says the Moro are not capable of self-government and must be civilized by force. The U.S. military launches campaigns into Moro territory. The Moro fight with krice, traditional curved swords, and whatever firearms they can capture. The Americans fight with rifles, artillery, and naval bombardment. The war is brutal. And then comes March 1906. Bud Dejo. Bud Dejo is a volcanic crater on the island of Jolo. American forces receive intelligence that Moro fighters are hiding in the crater. General Leonard Wood leads an assault. 800 American soldiers surround the crater and advance from all sides. When they reach the rim and look down, they see not an army but a refugee camp. About 1,000 Moro civilians, mostly women and children, have taken shelter in the crater to escape American patrols. There are maybe 100 fighters among them. General Wood does not call off the attack. He orders his artillery to open fire into the crater. For 2 days, American forces shell and shoot into the crater. When they finally descend, they find 996 Moro dead, 6 survivors. The American casualties, number 15, wounded, not killed, wounded. Wood reports back to Washington. He calls it a brilliant feat of arms. He is celebrated in the American press. Some newspapers question the morality of killing hundreds of women and children. Most do not. The official history calls it the Battle of Bud Dejo, not a massacre, a battle. And it is not taught in American schools. Most Americans today have never heard of Bud Dejo, just like they have never heard of Wounded Knee, of Sand Creek, of the dozens of other massacres that built this country. The pattern is always the same. Kill them, erase the memory, call it progress. One more example, and then I need you to see the pattern clearly. 1881. Sudan. A religious leader named Muhammad Ahmed declares himself the Mahdi, the guided one prophesied in Islamic tradition who will restore justice before the end times. He leads an uprising against Egyptian and British control of Sudan. And he wins. In 1885, Mahdist forces capture Khartoum and kill British General Charles Gordon, a hero of the British Empire. The death of Gordon shocks Britain. They swear revenge. But the Mahdist state survives for 13 years. It establishes Islamic law, builds a functioning government, and proves that Africans can defeat European armies. Britain does not forget. In 1898, they send General Kitchener with a massive force, modern rifles, artillery, Maxim guns, gunboats on the Nile. September 2nd, 1898, the Battle of Omdurman outside Khartoum. 50,000 Mahdist warriors face 8,000 British and Egyptian soldiers. The The Mahdists charge across open ground toward British lines. The Maxim guns open up. Imagine 500 rounds per minute, multiple guns firing simultaneously. The Mahdists walk into a wall of lead. They keep coming, wave after wave. They are chanting prayers as they die. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. They believe they are martyrs dying for the faith. They believe paradise waits for them. So they do not stop. For 5 hours they charge. 10,000 Mahdists die. The British lose 48 men. Winston Churchill is there as a young cavalry officer. He later writes in his memoir, "It was not a battle, but an execution." After the battle, British forces find the tomb of the Mahdi, who had died of illness years earlier. Kitchener orders the tomb destroyed. He has the Mahdi's body exhumed. The skull is separated from the body. Kitchener wants to keep it as a trophy. Eventually, he is convinced this would be too controversial, and the skull is buried at night in an unmarked location. The body is thrown in the Nile. The British want to erase even the memory of Mahdist resistance. They establish colonial rule over Sudan. They write histories that call the Mahdists fanatics and barbarians. They do not mention the courage. They do not mention that the Mahdist state functioned effectively for over a decade. They do not mention that Sudanese Muslims were defending their homeland against foreign invasion. They call it pacification. They call it civilization. They bury the truth. Do you see it now? 4 continents, 500 years, the exact same pattern repeating over and over. African Muslims build empires and resist slavery and colonization. They fight with faith and courage. They face European armies with superior weapons. They get massacred, and then they get erased from history. This is not coincidence. This is not accidental. This is systematic policy. European powers could not allow the world to know certain truths. They could not allow people to know that African Muslims built sophisticated civilizations, that they refused to participate in slavery, that they fought colonization with incredible bravery, that they demonstrated military skill that matched or exceeded European armies when weapons were equal, that their defeat came not from inferiority, but from being outgunned by industrial technology. Because if people knew those truths, the entire justification for colonialism collapses. The white man's burden, the civilizing mission, the idea that Europeans were bringing progress to backwards peoples, all of it falls apart. So they had to destroy not just the empires, but the memory of the empires. They had to make sure your children grew up thinking that Africans had no history worth learning, that Muslims were always fanatical and backwards, that resistance was futile because Europeans were simply superior. And for 100 years, it worked. Most people believe the lies. Most people have never heard of Lat Dior or Ousmane Dan Fodio or the Mahdi. Most people do not know about Bud Dajo or the burning of the Kano Library. Most people have been successfully brainwashed, until now, until this moment. If this truth is hitting you hard right now, I need you to do something. Comment the word truth below. Let me see how many of us are waking up. Hit that like button, not for me, but for every warrior who died fighting colonialism, for every library that was burned, for every history that was erased. Every like is an act of remembrance. Every share is an act of resistance. Because here's what they are terrified of. They spent 130 years burying this history. They burned libraries and banned oral traditions and rewrote textbooks. And now you know. Now you cannot be lied to anymore. Share this video with your family who needs to know their real history. Share it with your Muslim brothers and sisters who need to see Islamic resistance. Share it with your African friends who were taught they have no history. Share it with anyone who thinks black people or Muslims were passive victims. This is not just education. This is spiritual warfare. Every person who learns this truth is a person they cannot control anymore. So comment truth, hit like, share, and let us continue. Now I need to show you exactly how they erased this history. Not just by burning books, though they did that. Not just by killing witnesses, though they did that too. But through systematic legal, educational, and media suppression that continued long after the actual conquests ended. Let me break down the mechanism. Physical destruction first. We already talked about burning libraries. The Kano Library in Nigeria, the Almohad libraries in Spain, but it was more than that. In Senegal, after French conquest, soldiers went house to house searching for documents, royal archives of the Wolof kingdoms, family genealogies, land ownership records, treaties, letters, anything written. French military reports from the 1890s describe this explicitly. One report states, "We have confiscated and destroyed all documents found in the homes of former Wolof nobility." These materials could be used to make legal claims against French authority. Think about what that means. They were not destroying these documents because they were dangerous or seditious. They were destroying them because they were evidence. Evidence of land ownership that could be used to challenge French land seizures. Evidence of political organization that contradicted the narrative of African primitiveness. Evidence that had to disappear. The French also destroyed Wolof royal tombs. In many African cultures, tombs are not just burial places but sites of historical memory. Oral historians would visit tombs and recite the deeds of the ancestors buried there. French colonial authorities knew this, so they destroyed the tombs. They dug up remains and scattered them. They built French buildings on top of burial grounds. They wanted to break the physical connection between living Wolof and their history. And in many cases, it worked. Entire lineages lost track of their ancestry because the tombs were gone. In Sudan after Omdurman, the British did the same thing. The Mahdi's tomb was a pilgrimage site. Thousands of Sudanese Muslims would visit to pray and remember the Mahdist uprising. Kitchener demolished it completely. British engineers blew it up with dynamite. The stones were scattered. The site was turned into a British military depot. The message was clear. We own this land now. Your heroes are erased. Your memory is irrelevant. Then came the legal suppression. France passed the Code de l'Indigénat in 1887. It applied across all French colonies in Africa. The code gave French administrators the power to punish Africans without trial for a list of offenses, including disrespecting French officials, refusing to work on French projects, and inciting religious fanaticism. That last category was used to arrest anyone who talked about pre-colonial history in a positive way. If you told your children that your grandfather fought against France, that was inciting fanaticism. If you sang traditional songs that mentioned Wolof military victories, that was inciting fanaticism. Hundreds of people were imprisoned. Some were sent to forced labor camps. Some simply disappeared. In 1911, the French Governor-General issued a specific order, Order 447. It explicitly banned oral histories that glorified Wolof resistance. The penalty was 5 years in prison. Griots, the traditional oral historians, were the primary targets. French colonial police would attend community gatherings. If a griot started telling the story of Lat Dior or the Battle of Guélé, police would arrest him on the spot. This went on for decades. By the time Senegal gained independence in 1960, an entire generation had grown up without hearing the traditional histories. The oral chain was broken. Britain used similar tactics in Nigeria. The Collective Punishment Ordinance of 1902 allowed colonial authorities to punish entire villages if anyone in the village was suspected of anti-British activity. If one person in your village spoke favorably about the Sokoto Caliphate, the entire village could be fined, have land confiscated, or be subjected to forced labor. This created a culture of silence. People stopped talking about the past because it was dangerous. They stopped teaching their children because they did not want those children to accidentally say something that would bring British punishment down on the whole family. Britain also passed the Native Courts Proclamation in 1900. This law banned the application of Sharia law in Nigeria, except in very limited personal matters like marriage and inheritance. The Qadi courts that had administered justice under the Sokoto Caliphate were dissolved. British common law became the only legitimate legal system. Why does this matter? Because law is memory. The way a society administers justice reflects its values and history. By destroying the Islamic legal system, Britain was destroying a living connection to the Sokoto Caliphate. They were making sure that young Nigerians would grow up thinking British law was normal and Sharia was backwards, never knowing that their ancestors had lived under a sophisticated Islamic legal system for a century. The French did the same in Senegal. They banned Sharia courts. They required all imams to register with French authorities. They censored Friday sermons. If an imam preached about Islamic resistance to oppression, French police would shut down the mosque. Some imams were deported. The message was clear. You can practice Islam, but only in a way that does not threaten French power. You can pray, but you cannot remember. You can be Muslim, but you cannot be Wolof Muslim with all the historical and political meaning that carried. Property law was another mechanism of erasure. After conquest, the French declared that all land in Senegal belonged to the French state unless Africans could prove ownership with written deeds. But most Wolof land ownership was based on customary law and oral tradition. Families knew which land belonged to them because it had been in the family for generations. Everyone in the community acknowledged it. But there were no written deeds in the European sense. So when the French demanded proof, families could not provide it. The French then declared the land vacant and seized it. 2.5 million hectares, the best farmland in Senegal, taken, given to French settlers and French companies. Some Wolof families tried to fight this in colonial courts. They brought elders who could testify about customary ownership. The French courts rejected the testimony. One French colonial judge wrote in a decision from 1925, "Oral testimony about traditional land ownership is unreliable and cannot override French law." The family bringing the case was descendants of Lat Dior. They were trying to reclaim land that had belonged to the royal family of Cayor. The court ruled against them. The judge explicitly stated that because Lat Dior was a rebel against French authority, his family had no legitimate claims to anything. So not only did conquest steal the land, but French law made it impossible to ever get it back. Educational erasure was perhaps the most insidious mechanism. The French established colonial schools throughout Senegal starting in the 1890s. These schools taught in French, not Wolof. They taught French history, not African history. Senegalese children learned about Charlemagne and Joan of Arc and the French Revolution. They did not learn about the Wolof Empire or Lat Dior or any African heroes. The message was clear. Important history happens in Europe. African history does not matter. French colonial textbooks used in Senegalese schools in the 1920s state before the coming of the French, Senegal was populated by barbarous tribes with no civilization, no writing, no significant achievements. The French brought order, progress, and civilization. That is what Senegalese children were taught. That is what they believed because they had no alternative source of information. The oral traditions had been suppressed. The written records had been destroyed. The only history available was the French version. Even after independence in 1960, this did not immediately change. The educational system was still based on French models. Many teachers had been trained in French schools and believed the French version of history. It took decades for African historians to start recovering and teaching the true history of places like Senegal. And even today, even now, most textbooks give minimal coverage to African resistance movements. The story of Lat Dior might get a paragraph, maybe two. The Sokoto Caliphate might get a page. Compare that to the hundreds of pages dedicated to European colonial achievements. The imbalance is stark and deliberate. Media manipulation was the final layer. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers in Paris and London shaped European public opinion about colonialism. These papers almost never reported accurately on colonial wars. When they reported on the Battle of Guélé in 1886, it was 3 months after the fact and the coverage was minimal. The headline read, "Order Restored in Senegal." The article was 4 sentences. It did not mention the 1,800 Wolof killed. It did not mention Lat Dior by name. It just said, "Minor skirmish, French victorious, local unrest suppressed." That is how they framed the destruction of an empire. Minor skirmish. When news of Bud Dejo reached America in 1906, some newspapers did report the facts. That 996 people were killed, mostly women and children. There was briefly public outcry. But the Roosevelt administration and pro-imperialist media immediately went into damage control. They said the Moro were savages who used women and children as human shields. They said the Moro fired first. They said American soldiers had no choice. None of this was true, but it became the accepted narrative. Within a few months, the story disappeared from newspapers. It became a footnote, then forgotten entirely. Most Americans today have never heard of Budejo because the media buried it over a century ago. The British press did the same with the Battle of Omdurman in 1898. They celebrated British victory. They described Kitchener as a hero, but they minimized the slaughter. They called the Mahdists fanatics who brought destruction on themselves. The London Times ran a political cartoon showing a noble British soldier standing over cowering Sudanese tribesmen with the caption, "Civilization triumphs." That cartoon is how British people understood Omdurman, not as a massacre where 10,000 men were killed in 5 hours, but as proof of British superiority and Sudanese backwardness. The media framed the narrative. The public believed it. And that belief justified continued imperialism. Even now, today, in 2026, the media bias continues. How many movies have you seen about European colonial adventures? How many glorify exploration, discovery, bringing civilization to primitive peoples? How many show the brutal reality of conquest, the mass killings, the cultural destruction? Hollywood has made dozens of films set in colonial Africa. Most of them portray Africans as background characters in European stories. The heroic white explorer, the brave white soldier, the sympathetic white missionary. Africans are props, and African resistance is portrayed as savagery that must be overcome. There are exceptions. Some films and documentaries try to tell the truth, but they are rare, and they do not get wide distribution. The narrative is still controlled. The story is still told from the colonizer perspective. And that means most people, even well-meaning people who oppose racism, still have a fundamentally warped understanding of colonial history. They think it was mostly peaceful, with occasional unfortunate violence. They do not understand it was systematic warfare, cultural genocide, and theft on a scale almost unimaginable. So let me summarize the suppression mechanism. They destroyed the physical evidence, burned libraries, demolished tombs, confiscated documents. They created legal structures that punished anyone who tried to preserve memory, imprisoned oral historians, banned Islamic law, seized property. They built educational systems that taught only European history and erased African achievements. And they controlled media narratives to shape public opinion in favor of colonialism. This was not accidental. This was not just the fog of history obscuring distant events. This was deliberate, systematic, planned erasure. And it worked. For over a century, it worked. But it is not working anymore. Because you are learning the truth right now. And once you know, you cannot unknow. Once you see the pattern, you see it everywhere.